Close your eyes and imagine a heat so thick it feels like a wet shroud. Now, imagine you cannot take a full breath. For 30 years, Camille Desmarais lived in a state of permanent, suffocating rigidity. She was the statue of the Delta, a woman who moved through Mississippi society with a spine that never curved and a face that never flinched. But when she died in the summer of 1892, the local undertaker discovered the secret of her perfection. As he tried to lay her out for the viewing, her body fought him. She was locked, frozen. When he finally cut through the layers of expensive French silk, the sound wasn't the tearing of fabric. It was the screech of rusted metal. Camille wasn't wearing a corset. She was wearing a machine. It was a custom-forged iron cage bolted directly into the bone of her hips and ribs. This was not a fashion statement. It was a torture device she had chosen to wear every second of every day for 3 decades. The interior was lined with small, blunt iron pins. Every time she breathed, they pressed. Every time she spoke, they bit. Camille Desmarais didn't just walk through her plantation. She endured it. But the most disturbing discovery wasn't the metal. It was what was carved on the inside. 14 names, deeply etched into the steel where it had rubbed her flesh raw for 30 years. 14 names of people who had once lived on her land and then simply ceased to exist. What did Camille Desmarais believe she was achieving by turning her own body into a prison? Why did she keep the names of her victims pressed against her heart until the day she died? And what was the liturgy of silence she enforced at Desmarais Grove that kept the truth buried for generations? Before we uncover the bolts, subscribe, hit that bell, and comment your city below. Now, let me take you back to the year the air went silent. Let me take you to the Delta, where the moss hangs like funeral hair, and the ghosts are made of iron. Desmarais Grove was not a home. It was a cathedral built to worship the silence of Camille Desmarais. The plantation sat on the edge of a blackwater swamp, surrounded by ancient cypress trees that seemed to lean toward the house, as if trying to hear the secrets within. While other plantation owners in the Delta were known for their loud parties and displays of wealth, Camille was known for her stillness. She lived in a state of clinical detachment. She did not eat in front of others. She did not laugh. She moved through the high-ceilinged halls like a ghost caught in a loop. But it was the rules of her household that revealed the true nature of her madness. Camille could not tolerate the sound of life. She forced every person in the main house to wear small brass bells on their ankles and wrists. To a stranger, the sound might have seemed musical, but to the staff, it was a GPS for their survival. If Camille heard a bell clutter, a sign of a stumble or a hurried pace, she would appear. She wouldn't scream. She wouldn't strike. She would simply stare, with those cold, unblinking eyes, until the person withered. The bells ensured that no one could move without her knowing. No one could whisper. No one could conspire. She turned her servants into instruments, and she was the only one who knew the score. The only person allowed into Camille's inner sanctum was a woman named Hattie. Hattie was mute. Her tongue had been lost to a childhood fever, or so the story went. Every morning at 4 a.m., the household would hear the heavy, rhythmic thud of a mallet from Camille's bedroom. It was the sound of Hattie tightening the bolts of the iron corset. The staff called it the hammer of the morning. They knew that until that sound stopped, Camille was not a woman. She was a weapon, being loaded. But why did Camille require such a brutal architecture? Neighbors thought it was vanity, a desperate attempt to keep her youth. But the children of the quarters knew better. They said that if Camille ever breathed a full, deep breath, the house would crumble. They said the iron wasn't there to hold her up. It was there to hold the evil in. To understand Camille's iron cage, we must understand the liturgy of the Southern Belle. In the 1800s, a white woman of status was not a person, she was a sacrament. She was expected to be the angel of the house, fragile, motionless, and morally perfect. But this perfection was a psychological weapon. Doctors diagnosed any woman who showed independence or dark thoughts with hysteria. The cure? More restriction, more bed rest, more structural support. Camille Desmarais took this medical ideology and turned it into a weapon of war. By encasing herself in iron, she became the ultimate symbol of this cult. She was saying, "If I can endure this total lack of freedom, how dare you complain about yours?" Camille didn't just wear the iron for herself. She used it to enforce a liturgy of obedience across Desmarais Grove. She believed the spirit was a wild thing that had to be physically broken to be holy. She viewed the enslaved people on her plantation not just as labor, but as patients in her own twisted hospital. She practiced what modern psyops call environmental gaslighting. She made the air so quiet, the rules so rigid, that her victims began to doubt their own sanity. They began to believe their suffering was part of a divine order, anchored by the woman who never breathed a full breath. It was during this time that rumors of the white sleep began to circulate. Visitors noted the house staff moved with a strange, glazed expression. Too compliant. Too slow. Camille had been seen in her apothecary room, mixing laudanum with mercury and a third, unknown ingredient. She called it her tincture of grace. She didn't just bolt her body into iron. She began to bolt the minds of those around her into a chemical fog. But there was one person the white sleep couldn't touch. Hattie. Hattie was the only one who saw the raw, bleeding skin beneath the iron. She knew Camille wasn't a saint. She was a starving predator. For 30 years, the statue never faltered. But in the spring of 1874, the iron began to fail. Not the metal, but the flesh beneath it. The pressure had caused necrosis. Camille was literally rotting inside her armor. The silence was broken one Tuesday evening by a young girl named Ilara. As the room darkened, Ilara noticed a wet, dark stain blooming through the back of Camille's cream-colored silk dress. It wasn't wine. It smelled of old copper and rot. Ilara reached out. She touched the center of Camille's back. She expected the warmth of a person. Instead, her fingers met a cold, unyielding ridge of rusted iron. And then she heard it. A sound erupted from Camille that the staff would describe as the inward cry. It wasn't a scream. It was a rhythmic, metallic clicking, the sound of her ribcage vibrating against the iron bolts as she suffered a massive spasm. Camille turned. Her face was perfectly still, but her eyes were bloodshot, the vessels having burst from the strain. She simply whispered, "You've touched the ledger, child. Now, you must be recorded." Ilara was led away by Hattie. She was never seen in the Delta again. This is the moment the truth tightens. Camille's corset wasn't just a prison for her body. It was a filing cabinet for her crimes. Every time someone discovered the truth, they became a name on the inside. The staff began to notice that Hattie's mallet strikes in the morning were getting louder, more frequent. Hattie wasn't just tightening the bolts anymore. She was trying to flatten the iron against Camille's body, to stop the leaking, to stop the smell. The house became a cathedral of rot. Camille began to wear heavier perfumes, cloyingly sweet jasmine and lilies, to mask the scent of the dying tissue. She was a living tomb, walking among the living. She used her psychological authority to convince the world that the smell of death was simply the scent of grace. When Camille Desmarais finally breathed her last in August of 1892, the liturgy of silence was shattered by the cold reality of the blacksmith's hammer. Silas Thorne, the undertaker, had to call for a metalworker to remove her clothing. The silk had literally fused to the iron through years of weeping wounds and dried blood. As the iron was cut away in the dim light of the bedroom, a low, collective gasp filled the air. The corset was a masterpiece of cruelty, a double-walled cage. The outer layer was polished steel, but the inner layer, the layer married to her flesh for 30 years, was a jagged landscape of blunt iron pins. It wasn't designed to support her. It was designed to edit her, to punish her for every movement that wasn't approved by her own rigid code. But it was the backplate that held the true horror. Etched into the dark, rusted metal with a surgeon's precision were 14 names: Ilara, Samuel, Ruth, Thomas,